Paticca-Samuppada. One is the classical Thai way of looking at it. The other one is the classical Burmese way of looking at it. I'm offering yet a third way.
Right.
And that the way that I'm looking at it is that the process is not derived directly out of that sutta on right view, number 9, but rather, when I say derived, as you remember in that sutta, that Sariputta was answering questions in the sense of what is one's right view, and was doing some of the connections, saying that this is dependent upon that. But the only place so far that I've been able to find it is that when the Buddha talked about Paticca-Samuppada or causal, he was only talking about consciousness.
Right.
And that the consciousness that is arising is dependent upon the Pali word is salayatana, and what that means is the sense organs. And so you have a sense organ like hearing or taste or whatever like that.
The sixth sense base, yeah.
Yeah. And also bodily sensations down, not just on the surface of the skin, but deep proprioceptic sensations also. And primarily, you could go so far as to say is that number 6, the mind, is probably the place where most of it gets started anyway. That there is a new kind of way of looking at the second noble truth that's actually quite much the way that the Buddha looked at it. Instead of looking at the second noble truth in the sense that suffering is caused by moba, loba, dosa, or by greed, ill will, and ignorance, that another way of looking at it is that suffering is caused directly by anicca, or changing things, everything that changes, and because of an inherent unsatisfactory changing nature, that everything is subject to suffering. And so then that suffering can be broken down as lobha, moba, dosa. In other words, lobha, moba, dosa, which is the greed, ill will, and ignorance, doesn't cause suffering. They're the components of suffering. That the cause of the suffering is anicca, or temporariness. So that's a kind of a different way of looking at that. Where the more traditional or classic way of looking at it is that lobha, moba, dosa create or cause suffering, rather than the fact that they are the suffering itself or the result of ignorance. But these kind of things are very, very subtle, and they're almost to the point of being linguistic issues rather than meditation issues.
Okay.
That really, what if there's anything to be investigated at that level, how to say it? I want to go back and start a little bit before that. That at the point when you recognize that the mind has wandered away, that's more than likely due to hindrance. That we can fill it actually with 3 things, rather than the 2 that I gave you. Do you remember what were the 2 that I gave you? Was joy and emptiness, or to leave it empty. But there's another additional one that is actually quite important that I left out and that I shouldn't have, is the Dhamma itself. And I'm referencing now the Satipatthana Sutta number 10 in the Majjhima Nikaya, to where the Dhammanupassana talks about not only the hindrances and their eradication, as through the point of ignorance, but also the contemplation of and the full understanding of the 7 factors of enlightenment, the 4 noble truths, the Eightfold Noble Path. So you're practicing it through Anapanasati, and that the methods or the foundations are through the Satipatthana. But when we get down to the objects that need to be investigated, the Dhamma is definitely something that we should be looking at to contemplate how the 4 noble truths actually lead, especially number 4, to eventually the end of suffering altogether.
Right.
But that the anicca quality, rather than going into suffering directly, we can, with a bit of wisdom, go from that anicca. In other words, we have now recognized that the mind has wandered away. That's the anicca, okay? Before we were watching the breath. Now the mind's wandered away. Or one more point is that now we've recognized the mind wandering away. At that point of recognizing the mind wandering away, there's many possibilities. One of the things to do is just to let it continue to wander, with or without noting, which is what a lot of people will do, especially if they're into a system about choiceless awareness.
Right.
But if they have the right process, they recognize that these hindrances are, in fact, the suffering mind, that the mind is suffering while it's doing one of these hindrances. And so the right thing to do at that moment is to extract it, to throw that thought, that hindrance out, and go back to the breath with either the thoughts of joy and happiness, which is the first thing to do, or eventually joy and happiness mixed with the investigation of the Dhamma.
Right.
Now, the reason we're talking about the 4 noble truths here is that in the Sabha Asava Sutta, in verse number 11, write this down because you'll want to look at it.
Right.
In fact, all the way up to the Sabha Asava number 11, starting. What the first part of the sutta is talking about is all the various kinds of thoughts and worries we can have about the self, including what was I in the past, what will I be in the future, who am I now, given this, what will that be, etc., like this, these kind of questions that lead us into a thicket of views. The thicket of views will be something like reincarnation or some religion or some belief system, that kind of thing. But
Right.
if we are able to avoid this series of questions about who we are and instead investigate the 4 noble truths as they are, then we can come to the conclusion, especially at that point that we're talking about of clinging, where we have these 4 modes of clinging. One of the modes of clinging is to a doctrine of self. This is what we mean by a belief system or a doctrine that all the religions have. For instance, Christianity has the doctrine of a self that's probably very much not only consciousness, but also has the body built into it, because many people believe that they will be reunited in heaven with their loved ones.
Yeah.
Well, how are they going to be reunited with their loved ones unless they have a way of recognizing each other? And so here comes the illusion of the body, as well as all of their memories, all their consciousness, and everything like that, as if they're going to remember what life was like on earth, because they're going to be reunited with their loved ones, you see. So they've got memories of how it was and all of that. This is a doctrine of self that we can begin to understand that actually causes us a lot of suffering. One of the ways of suffering that it causes is people will start to worry about, well, what's going to happen to me then? I've been a bad boy. Maybe I won't get reunited with my folks, and if I do, maybe we'll all be burning in hell for it, you see. What people don't realize is that the whole concept of hell was invented to control people. It's part of, you see, almost worldwide, universal, in every religion that I know of, and in every legal system that I know of. It's just so pervasive that people believe in the law of karma, except that they believe that it doesn't work well enough to work on its own, that it needs their help.
Right.
And so this is what laws are. Laws are like man's attempt at fixing the law of karma that's broken, in the sense that if you do bad, it won't be the law of karma that gives you bad results. It's going to be the cops. Or it's going to be some group of people or whatever, the church ladies, the
Yeah.
that and so what happens at that level is that we wind up in a situation to where we're trying to control each other's behavior by rewarding each other when we're good and punishing each other when we're bad. So it's man's feeble attempt to try to make the law of karma work, because deep down inside we recognize it really doesn't. That without my help, she really will not get punished for having that abortion. Therefore, we got to go make her hurt. You know, that's the
Yeah.
kind of mentality that we have. And so, at some deep level, humanity says, well, there ought to be a law of karma. And so, if we can't come up with a natural law of karma with a huge karma machine in the sky, we'll start making rules about it. Rites, rules, and rituals.
Right.
Okay, so these rites, rules, and rituals then become one of the modes of clinging. The people who cling to rules the most are the ones who are trying to enforce the rules on other people. But they're also the ones who cling to the rules the most, or the second most, are those who are trying to get out from under other people making their rules for them. But ultimately, we need a society, and we're going in that direction to where each individual makes their own rules. Now, in the old days, most religions, and in fact Christianity still very much holds this point, that if a group of people are non-believers, then they'll also be immoral, because it's the Christian churches that tells us not kill and not steal, the Ten Commandments and all that. So if people are not bound by the religious rules, that they will be naturally lawless.
Right.
To where it's not necessarily true that in fact our society, most of the people who consider themselves atheists were still brought up in that society, and that if you look at it like this, I don't know about the statistics for your country, but in U.S. now more than 30% of the population are atheists. And yet if you go and look in the prisons, the people who are in prison are the Christians and the Muslims. The atheists who are atheists, I mean, there's also gangbangers and hoodlums who don't have much of a belief system. But for the people who have been atheists in the sense that they were Christian and came out of it because of investigation and coming to the conclusion, what they don't do is they don't lose their moral underpinning, but they remain very moral people. Then, in fact, the atheists wind up being more moral than the Christians. Why? Because the Christians are still trying to shove down many people's throats their version of the rules. They become church ladies. They become vicious church ladies often, to where the atheists, if there's anything with them, some of them are still angry, over when they're coming out of Christianity, they come out of it knowing that they've been lied to. They're angry. They're, this like, what have you done to me kind of thing. But
Yeah.
once they get over that, their moral system is still intact. And each one of the atheists don't necessarily, when they say, oh, well, I'm leaving the church, that doesn't mean that he's going to pick up an AK-47 and go blow a whole bunch of people away. That's a different kind of mentality. In fact, the surprise is that it's people who have beliefs. What that means is that, for instance, all of our learning skills, all of our language learning skills,
Right.
our alphabets, our language, our ability to speak, but also many of the things that we have learned, for instance, any songs or poetry or conventions like that, is all that kind of stuff that's stored from old times. To where the verbal, the mental formations have then to do with our beliefs, have to do with our views, have to do with our attachment to rules and rituals, more or less. And so that kind of sankara is built up over time, and a huge amount of it happens when we're really young. Much of our decision making and much of the personality of who we are is developed when we're very young. This is what they mean by, and you can also see that when you got a new child, start watching her, because as you watch her, you will become aware of that she is going through the same kind of process that you went through at that age.
Right.
You can see that a young infant, when they want to see something, they want to grasp at it. But their grasping is not very good. Their fingers are not very well defined. The motor movements are gross. Even at a level of 2 and 3-year-olds, they can't use a crayon and draw a picture. All it is just kind of scribbling and scratching because they don't have the motor skills developed. This undeveloped motor skills system that we're talking about can be, in fact, called the ignorance. Because when a child is born, they are born really, really, really ignorant, don't know anything. And so the process of our learning is also a process of making maps, because the reality that confronts an infant is literally overwhelming. And so what we have to do is close down or narrow down things. And this is where we start into making maps. We have parts of the territory that we don't go into because that's combined with other things.
Right.
And so it's through this combination. One of the examples of that is grandiosity. Another form of it is overgeneralization. That our maps will have us to where you've got a lot of fun there happening.
Yeah. Huh? What? It's, I don't know if there's any left. There's no paper left.
What's that?
Just ask mommy for a copy. Ask mommy for a copy.
Yes, we were talking about the maps that can contain problems or false things. One of them is grandiosity, and the other one is overgeneralization.
Right.
People will fall into the trap of thinking that all dogs have characteristic A, where in fact, perhaps not all dogs have that characteristic. Okay. Another kind of grandiosity would be something like talking about the U.S. government, where in fact, in reality, there's no such thing as the U.S. government. Sure, there's a lot of land, there's a lot of buildings, there's a lot of bank accounts, there's a lot of people. And all of those people will have their own ideas about the U.S. government, but many times, surprise, surprise, it won't be the same ideas. Not everybody believes the same things about the U.S. government. In fact, it's really impossible to find it because it's an overgeneralization. It's a kind of grandiosity that the best that we can do is that we can take an aspect of the U.S. government and talk about that. But even that may be hard to do because of the fact that our maps are stuck together in order to make life easy. So we'll take things like a letter A and a letter B and we'll slam it together with a whole bunch of other letters and call it an alphabet. And then we only have to think the word alphabet. So we're trying to simplify through grouping. All right. This is what we mean by formations. This is map building. And that sometimes as children we'll put into our map some hideously destructive things.
Okay.
So that we wind up then as part of our map, the part of the way that we do things is that we deal with things the way that our map tells us to do with them. Many times what we put into our maps is learned behavior. Here's a very good example. When a person gets angry at you, your job is to get angry. But in fact, most of us think of when we are angry, we're either angry at the person we're talking to or we're angry at a third party, like maybe the bank or whatever. As we're talking, we want the person we're talking to be feeling the way that we feel. So we talk as if we want them to be angry at that bank. And so if the responder is not angry at the bank because A wants him to be angry and B is not angry at the bank, then A will become angry at B.
Right.
He'll do anything to get him angry. When we are on fire with anger, two general things will happen. One is that we will deny that we're angry, and two, we will try to make other people feel the same way that we feel, which is angry. And that's very, very characteristic. So you have both the quality of denial in it, as well as the quality of trying to force other people to feel the way that we feel.
Right.
So these are part of our maps. Almost everybody has that map, and it takes a while to unravel that map so that when A is angry, we as B do not have to become angry. We can change our map so that we don't have to follow this anger begets anger mode. But that takes some presence of mind to begin to wake up, to begin to change those old habit patterns of the mind. And the way that we do that is when the mind, when we aware when those hindrances arise. And that the hindrance, by the way, of ill will is very, very common for people. That's the way that we respond to many, many things, but it's because that's our old pattern, our old habit of mind.
Right. What? Yeah, very clear. Yeah. You're just gluing one page onto the other. Yeah, go on.
Who was that? Your wife?
That's my,
huh?
No, it's my daughter. My daughter. She's asking me, can she do stuff? She wants to use super glue to glue a page onto a book.
Oh, okay. All right.
It's children's super glue.
Okay, all right. Yeah, the super glue itself can be dangerous for a little kid. They can get it on their fingers, and then you get their
Exactly, yeah.
hands stuck together.
Well, what I was saying to you earlier was, you know, certain things that you know that you cling to, or that you have craving for, like, say, smoking, for instance. If you stop smoking for like 2 or 3 weeks, the craving and the clinging kind of disappears. So that's one form of clinging and craving that you have already eliminated.
Well, yes, but if you look at it, there were those moments when you wanted the cigarette, and the old habit would be to go ahead and do it. But now the new habit is no. So you're interrupting. Okay,
Yeah,
so you're interrupting those habits all along the way until eventually they begin to die out.
yes.
You're beginning to change those old habit patterns of the mind.
So
Okay,
you can do that for a lot of things, really. And then
everything,
and also
everything,
and also
everything.
and also add mindfulness.
Yes, those old habit patterns can be our entire personality.
Yeah,
And that the habit patterns of the mind, these old sankaras, define whether we're male or female or gay or any of that kind of stuff. And they're very, very deeply buried.
right.
Um, that doesn't mean that they can't be changed, but it also, like, you know, the Christians have this thing about trying to take gays and turning them into straight people.
Yeah,
That, in a way, is a form of violence because there's no real reason to do that. And a person has to want at a really, really deep level.
but it's not natural, like, right?
Well, there is a lot of indication that um, homosexuality is learned behavior, but we don't know how deep it is. I was looking at that for Kitty. The other part of it that I'm looking at is the sense of right-handed versus left-handed. At the age of 3, she hasn't made a distinction yet as to whether she's going to be left-handed or right-handed. That hasn't
Right.
been built in yet. But when it does get built in, it will get built in right down at the physical level. So this is not a verbal level thing. These are physical level things. These are
Right.
bodily formations, whether left-handed or right-handed. The same thing is about LGBT. That can also be right down to the physical level.
What's OBGT?
Lesbian, L, gay, G, bi, and trans.
Okay.
That's a very common term in America.
Yeah, yeah.
All right.
There's a no, there's a lot in Thailand and the Philippines as well.
Well,
It's like in
they
in
say
Philippines.
that homosexuality is like 1 or 2%, but here in Thailand it's probably about 5. And
Yeah,
that the gays are on TV, the gays have their own lifestyle. What you have is here in Thailand is you don't have the church ladies pointing their fingers. You don't have this I'm good and you're bad kind of view about the gay people. It's
yeah,
there. Buddhism doesn't have thou art going to hell for being an LGBT kind of mentality. That in fact the gays are welcomed, open part of the society. And because of that, there's really no such thing as a closet because there's no need of it.
yeah.
This may be, in fact, part of the reason why the percentage is higher here is because in the West, when they get percentages, they're missing, what, half or 2/3 of the people who are still in the closet. They won't come out because they're afraid of whatever thing or not, because of the church ladies
Yeah,
will have something to say about it.
Ireland was the Ireland was the first country in Europe to bring in gay marriage, but I don't think I I don't think everybody supports it, because I think the only people who actually voted that day were gay people who went out to vote. So all
Good,
the
good on them. I'm glad they did.
yeah,
Um,
but it's still
we
not
can
really.
actually get off into marriage, because that's a very interesting topic to look at.
Yeah,
You see, marriage again is in that realm of rites, rules, rituals, and whatnot. It had some ideas about, uh, if we want to be altruistic and wonderful and all of that, we'll think about that marriage has a lot to do with children. Unfortunately, that's not the case. Marriage has a whole lot to do about men owning women, and that the marriage was a ceremony that marked that the father of that girl no longer owns the girl. Now she is owned by a man who's paid the father enough money or whatever in order to transfer that ownership.
right.
That's what marriage used to be all about. Now, what happened in Rome was very interesting, because you see, Rome was at about 500 BC was kind of like a den of thieves, or a pirate's hideout, or whatever. The worst people from the peninsula of what is now known as Italy would go and congregate into Rome, because uh, they had no family or whatever like this. What that brought about was is that there were very few women in Rome at that time,
Right.
and so there was a shortage of women. And that shortage of women can cause a lot of trouble. For instance, in the 1840s, when the Chinese were trying to, especially men, were trying to escape from the British and the Opium Wars, a lot of Chinese men came to Thailand, and in seeking wives, they destroyed the community of Thailand, because many of them were wealthy, and so they really disrupted a lot of stuff. So going back to Rome, what happened was is that the Romans were going and on raids to raid and steal women from the Etruscans and from others. The whole concept then was is that they passed a law or a rule in Rome that was quite remarkable, because so few women, and that most of them had been not just concubined, but literally stolen as booty from raids and whatnot. They passed a rule saying that only a man could only own one woman, because if a man owned two women, and there's five guys over here that don't have any woman, there's going to be real trouble. And so this is where the whole concept of monogamy came from. The Christians think that the monogamy goes back to Jewish roots, but no, the Jews were polygamous. And you look all throughout the Old Testament, especially the kings were polygamous. For instance, Abraham, he had two wives or three wives. There was Rachel and whatnot. Um, the King Solomon was supposed to have hundreds, and David would have a bunch of them. So the old
They were,
Jews were not monogamous. They were very much like the Arabs, in the sense of you have as many women as you can afford if the women are available. What the problem with Rome is that they didn't have enough women available, and that's where that rule came from. The Christians, when they moved into Rome, they had to assume that, because that had been a rule for many hundreds of years by the time Christianity had started. And Christianity still thinks that monogamy is a Christian idea. No, it's a pagan idea that just happened to be there that if the Christians really want to be Jewish, they would still be polygamous.
Yeah.
So again, about marriage is a convention or a rule, and that because it's so widespread and because there's so much bad feelings associated with it, when we take on our own set of rules in the sense of suffering and no suffering, we can take that suffering and no suffering to apply to that situation immediately. Now, within Buddhism, even at the mundane level, that the sexuality issue has to do with a man not, and I guess you could reverse this for women too. But for a man, there's 4 kinds of women that are not available to him. One is a woman who is already married. Another one would be a child who is under the auspices of her father. Another one who would be, and by the way, the one married is also, they talk about a garland, or already confirmed. The other kind would be the kind that where the woman was part of an institution. For instance, like a military, or she was a nun, or she was part of an order where she was expected not to be a part of a sexual encounter because she's got other obligations. So these are the kinds of things that you would want. Now, what you'll wind up with is, within Christian ideals, you'll have the idea that prostitution should be illegal because of all the suffering it causes. But by making prostitution illegal and by locking up the prostitutes, what they're doing actually is they're adding to suffering. They're not eliminating any. That within the Buddhists, for instance, in Thailand, that prostitution is completely legal. Not completely, but completely enough, in the sense that it really wasn't much of an issue until the Americans came. And that is still not much of an issue throughout Thailand, but where you'll find most of the prostitution is in the tourism areas.
Right.
This Western tourists are coming to Thailand for the prostitution because prostitution here is legal. But there was a while, there was a lot of STD. There was some AIDS, there was some syphilis. A lot of that came from the American military. And how the Thai government managed that was by making the brothels themselves, or the bars, require the girls who worked there to have health cards, to have doctors check them out. Meanwhile, a whole bunch of doctors went into that business of being able to go to the brothel while all the girls were there, do all the tests, and give the cards to the girls who were well, and give the girls who were not well an opportunity to get the health care they needed.
Right.
And in that regard, the Thai government was actually able to, without much police involvement at all,
Right.
was able to solve the problem of the STD, so that it's not much of a problem. The other thing is that an advertisement campaign to get the girls to make the men wear condoms. So with that, they really did crack down on the problem. But in the United States, they still have a whole lot of trouble. Why? Because the girls can't get the health care they need because they're in a legal industry.
Right.
And so by making prostitution illegal, they cause trouble.
Yeah.
So this is the whole concept of, and these are just little examples of how rules are the problem for society. But we're not here as individuals to solve the society's problems. We're here as individuals to solve our own individual problems. And
Right.
one of the ways of doing that is by coming out of our own attachments to rites, rules, and rituals, and to start living in the here now based upon the facts and the reality on the ground. especially in the issue of suffering and no suffering, that we can see how suffering is caused and we can eliminate it at that level. So
Yeah.
what we begin to see then is that suffering is caused by clinging. Suffering is caused by a clinging self, and
Right.
that there are four modes of clinging. There's clinging to a doctrine of self. What will I be? Where will I go? Etc. like that. Then there is the Pali word is silabata paramasa, which is the attachment to rites, rules, and rituals. The next one, which we've been covering for quite a while, is the issue on right view, is to hold no views. Any view that you hold, one, is likely not going to be completely factual. It's going to have problems to it with it. And number two, we can always get into arguments with other people who hold different views, and nobody holds the same view for a long time, much less two different people holding all the same view all at the same time. Not going to happen. You can always
Yeah.
find something to argue over
Yeah.
if you hold views. When you come out of holding views, then there's nothing to argue over anymore, because I don't hold any views. Now, there's a kind of a catch-22, but it's only a semantic catch, and that's the one. I think I even sent this to you in an email, where I said, I hold the view that no view is worth holding. How stupid is that? I hold the view that no view is worth holding. Well, the answer is that I'm not holding the view that no view is worth holding. That's not a held view.
Right.
That is not a grasping and clinging kind of that is more or less a let go. The same thing is true in around the word atheist. That the word atheist is problematic, that a better word for the atheist to use, and by the way, it would really be difficult for the Christians to handle this, is just say, oh, I'm an unbeliever. I'm not an atheist. I just don't believe. Whatever you say, I don't believe it.
Yeah.
Because that's another way of just not holding a view, where atheism can in fact be a whole crowd of views, and it could be even a belief system.
Right.
And that this is what a lot of Christians will hold against the atheists, and say, well, you just got another religion, it's just atheism. But not a real atheist, because a real atheist is just a non-believer. Don't hold any views about whatever it is you believe. So the last one that we need to touch on here for this talk is the concept of what is called in Buddhism sensual desire. Okay, now sensuality in English almost always, especially in the United States, refers to sexuality.
Yeah.
But this is not what we mean by sensuality. The sensuality is actually the eyes, the nose, the throat, the salayatana, the things that we can cling to. And in fact, that's where craving is mentioned in the Samadhi Sutta, number 9, in the Majjhima Nikaya, the one on right view, is that the grasping, or the indication that leads to clinging, is actually sense-based. And that's especially true with the clinging that is sensual. Just 100%, that kind of clinging is based on sense-based. Now, Bhikkhu Buddhadasa talks about sensuality more so in the sense of materialism. And here's why. Most of the problems of sexuality in our culture in America, and this may be true also in Ireland, is about the rules about sexuality. But most of the real issues of sexuality, like birth, well, birth can go in many ways. I mean, in the old days, birth was really a challenge. Many women died in childbirth.
Yeah.
It was very dangerous. But now childbirth is easy. They've got cesarean sections, they've got saddle blocks, they've got medical people, they've got the whole thing wired. Your wife probably went through very little suffering in order to deliver her baby.
I don't think she'd agree with the little bit of suffering.
Then have her do it out in the woods alone and see
Yeah, yeah.
if she changes her mind.
It's actually she had it 2 hours after the first contraction.
She had a what?
She had the kid 2 hours after the first contraction.
I didn't hear what it was that she had after her first contraction.
She delivered the baby after 2 hours.
Okay.
2 hours. Yeah.
Well, she's had others before. Believe me, she would not say on a relative basis that this child was enormous suffering. She would say that it was just a little bit. Okay, but in the old days, birth was a real problem. In fact, that the Buddhist mother herself died in delivering the Buddha. That his mother died within 7 days of his birth.
All right.
We can also see that in the old days, pregnancy was not easy to control. But now we have contraceptives. Since the 1960s, we have had no trouble, except for the church ladies who are going around trying to make rules about contraceptives. When I talk about church ladies, I'm talking about a wide group of people who are trying to impose their rules on other people, causing suffering. But if those church ladies weren't out there making all these rules and girls could have contraception, they would never have a child unless they wanted one.
Yeah.
So a lot of the problems of sexuality have been solved because they were always medical issues. And in the old days, in the time of the Buddha, these medical issues were real. Killed people, caused enormous suffering. People would get sick. They would have syphilis. They would have gonorrhea. They would have all kinds of other problems. Herpes, all that stuff existed back in time. And so abstaining from sex was the only way to guarantee that you didn't have any of those kind of troubles. But you fast forward today and you'll recognize that sexuality is not a problem now. That almost all of the old problems that the Buddha had in his day, we don't have them today. But we've got a different kind of sensuality problem. And that is not sexuality. Our problem is materialism. But it's the same sensual desire. And that one of the ways that we can see this, especially back in the 1950s when Bernays was selling automobiles, he'd always park a beautiful girl beside the automobile with the idea that you can't tell the difference between how beautiful this car is and how desirable the girl is.
Yeah.
Okay. So back to the issue about sensuality being an issue of sexuality. If you see a pretty girl, that doesn't mean that you have to want her. You can allow her to be pretty. You're a very beautiful girl. I like your makeup. You got a nice dress on. Now, goodbye. Enough.
Yeah.
I've seen it. I've seen it all. Get out. We don't have to desire her. And yet she's working very hard to make herself desirable.
Right.
So this is an issue. We don't have to look at a pretty girl and say, oh, I'm having trouble keeping my precepts. No, that's got nothing to do with your precepts. Now, when Jesus said that if you commit adultery in your heart with a girl, then you've committed adultery already, the Buddha would understand that in the sense of the committing of the adultery means that you are filled with lust. You are filled with desire. You want her so bad that the actual act of doing it is just a next logical step from where you are, because you're already in a sense of wanting. But if you are able to allow a girl to be beautiful without wanting her, then that's not sensual desire, but that's just sensuality. But in our modern times, a much bigger problem with our craving and clinging is to material possessions. We oftentimes confuse material possessions with survival issues, because in our society that could be true. Without a car, you can't get a job, or you lose your job. Without your job, you don't eat. So you kind of see your car as a survival issue, where in fact it's not really. That's just the kind of clinging that we do, and the kind of mistakes that we make that keep us bound to our material possessions.
Right.
That one of the things that happens with people who go to Asia or take a leave or whatever like that is they have to, especially if they're going to do it for years, is they have to abandon all their physical possessions. And
Yeah.
that's a little bit hard to do when you've got a household full of stuff. And that's part of the reason why divorce is so traumatic for people, is not that they're just saying goodbye to the wife and the wife is saying goodbye to the guy. No, they've got to divide up all their material possessions, including kids, cars, house, furniture, who gets which laptop. And that's where the fighting starts. It's not that, they're saying goodbye to each other. They can say goodbye to
Yeah.
each other. That's not the problem. When they're both ready to go, they're ready to go. But it becomes an issue of materialism. That's where the hang-up gets struck. So please, when we understand the issue of sensual desire, we're not thinking about it strictly and solely in the sense of sexuality. In fact, sexuality winds up being a very small aspect.
Right.
So now we've covered the four. We've got clinging to the doctrine of self. Okay, the doctrine of self is our ideas or beliefs about a self. And that we have materialism and sensual desire, which also has quality of self in it. We also cling to rites, rules, and rituals. This is, again, a quality of self that's doing the clinging. And also the fourth one is attachments to views and beliefs. And again, these are also the kind of self. So in the list of the 10 fetters, what we wind up with is 4 of these fetters are these 4 modes of clinging. And that the very first one to go is the personality view or the doctrine of self.
Right.
The second one to go is the clinging to rites, rules, and rituals. Okay? Now, surprisingly enough, the attachments to materialism and our attachments to our sensual desires has a mirror image or a backside to it. And that is that if we are not getting our sensual needs met, that's where the anger and ill will comes. If there is no sensual desire, then there's no reason for the human mind to come up in anger and frustration and whatnot like that. So ill will and sensual desire are 2 very, very tightly bound aspects. And that they
Right.
come together, so they will go together. As you are ridding yourself of anger, you will also be ridding yourself of materialism and material desire. And how we're doing this is through wisdom. So we're taking this second noble truth, the cause of suffering, this moba, loba, dosa. Loba is lust or desire. Moba is the anger, and dosa is the delusion. So if we are changing our delusion into wisdom because of our mindfulness and our investigation factor, then we can begin to see how these things are wrapped up. But these things don't get done first. The first things that we need to deal with is the issue of the doctrine of self.
Right.
Personality view. This is the number one and beginning fetter, and that people who cannot finish off that fetter will have trouble with dealing with the other 3. the sensuality, the clinging to rules, and the clinging to views.
All right.
These are, in fact, the sensuality and the doctrine itself were generally considered lower fetters, to where the and also the doctrine of self, sensuality, and rites, rules, and rituals are considered lower fetters, to where the doctrine, or excuse me, the right view or clinging to views is generally kind of considered a higher fetter.
Right.
All right, so as we're able to clear out our suffering, because we're able to clean out this issue of clinging through these four modes, how we do that is through investigation. Now, even though these things are deep, they will still arise on a regular occasion in the sense of the hindrances.
Right.
And if we cut the hindrance off as soon as it's recognized, then the underlying, almost like if you can cut the grass right down at the nubbins, then the root system will die out because it doesn't get any nourishment.
Okay.
That you will nourish these old habits through the hindrances, but when you're clear out and you don't have hindrances, those old things will die out on their own. And so always we go back to keeping the mind free from hindrance. And so when we investigate the Dhamma, when we investigate the Dhamma, we're doing so hopefully with a mind free of hindrances.
Right.
And so we can see things clearly and directly. We can see how the suffering is created. And so that's what makes the path actually quite easy at this level. Now, if you're at the level where you have, when the mind is free from hindrance, what we call that is we call that a mind fit for work. But it's especially better fit for work if it also has joy. Okay.
Right.
For instance, the distinction between confusion and curiosity would be joy. That we add the joy to the confusion, and then we can see it as curiosity. And we can say, hey, what was that? Let me go look at that. Let me go find out what that was. Let's go a little deeper into it. And so this is part of the reason why the Buddha added the gladdening of the mind to the mental process. So as we're doing anapanasati and we're beginning to see the mind either in hindrance or free from hindrance, we're beginning to see the mind itself.
Right.
As we practice further, we begin to see whether the mind is clear or whether it's cloudy. We can see whether we've been in this state before or whether this is a brand new state, which can be like exalted. Like, has the mind ever been this clear before? Has it ever been this exalted before? You can also begin to see the mind in states of concentration. You can really begin to understand the nature of the mind. And the way that we learn about the mind is through clearing out these hindrances over and over and over again, and begin to watch the mind as it improves and changes while it's free from hindrance.
Yeah.
That there's never really any reason for us to take the mind any further than second jhana or any reason further than first jhana, but it is the mind's, especially with certain techniques, it is the mind's natural inclination to go into the higher jhanas, because these are natural states, they're not unnatural at all. So in a way, we have to work harder at first jhana than the others, because we want to be able to enter the first jhana and then maintain the first jhana and then come out of the first jhana controlled. What we mean by maintaining the first jhana is either we don't slip out of it by accident because of hindrances arriving, but we also maintain the first jhana by not allowing the mind to go completely blank. We don't go into the second jhana. Or another way of looking at it, we don't let the feelings of the body called piti overwhelm us. That we
Yeah.
keep them at a level of happiness or good feelings, that they don't overwhelm us in the second jhana. This is again why the Buddha talked about that first jhana is the path to enlightenment. Why? Because in the first jhana is that place where we can be free from the hindrances, all 5 of them, and that we are in a state of mind that is fit for work, and that we're doing the proper analysis based upon anicca, dukkha, anatta, tathata, sunyata, and also we're dealing with the Dhamma, especially the Dhamma in the sense of the Four Noble Truths and the 7 factors of enlightenment. When we deal with the Four Noble Truths, we have to also include that we're talking about the Eightfold Noble Path. So the Four Noble Truths winds up being quite complicated. So when we're dealing with that, then that's the mind that you want to have. In other words, what you want to do, if you're thinking, so here's a way of looking at it. If your mind has wandered away, you can think about what was the mind doing when it wandered away. Was it actually detailed figuring out how the Dhamma works in the mind? Or were we thinking about the past or the future? Because the past and the future, that's a form of hindrance, keeping us out of the present moment. This is another way of investigating the mind, of knowing what's in the mind while the mind is in operation. So getting back then to this concept of Paticca-Samuppada, it is true that we have these various things that are going on, and that some of them are happening instantaneously, and that all of them are considered part of Sariputta's right view. But to say this one causes that one, causes this one, causes that one, and steps right from 1 to 12, if we get into that mode of thinking, then we're not going to be able to map the Paticca-Samuppada clearly back to the mind itself. So don't get too involved with why this causes that. And that's especially true at that level where we think that the step 1 is ignorance. The step 2 is sankhara, which we've clearly defined as bodily, mentally, and verbal. And then we say that consciousness is caused by the I and the form. That's also a kind of sankhara. And in fact, Sariputta uses that word sankhara, but he's talking about it as an arising sankhara. It's something that is new.
Right.
Where the other kind of sankhara, the bodily formation, the mental formation, and the verbal formations, those are old maps. And so it's not the same sankhara, and yet that's the mistake that a lot of people make. It's much better to look at it in the sense of using that map and the ignorance and the sankhara as sort of a base. And then we want to start with the salayatana, or the body formations in the sense of the eyes, the ear, the nose, and the object. And when those two contact, consciousness arises. Consciousness is very, very bare. It is bare knowing. It is not recognition. It's just seeing the form. That there is a second process that comes in, and that process is called the nama-rupa, or the quality of taking that bare object that we have in consciousness and give it a name. That's the recognition process.
Right.
So that we recognize what that is. That's when, once that happens, is where contact occurs. Okay, the real contact is to recognize what it is. And with that contact is when feeling arises. This normally happens with the mind. So as a hindrance arises in the mind, then the consciousness of that hindrance arises, and then the proliferation starts, the nama-rupa, which leads us into the feelings.
Right.
Okay, so this is where the whole ball of wax gets started. And if you can begin to see that process of the way that the mind works, so that you wind up then, because of the way that we feel, we wind up in grasping and clinging, which leads to the self. But there's another way of saying it is that at the salayatana, or right after the salayatana, when you have consciousness, during that phase of recognition, there may also be self arising there, in the sense of, as I told you about the concept of a car is on fire versus my car is on fire. The my car is on fire is going to give a completely different feeling. Okay, there may be tension and anxiety when a car is on fire out in the parking lot, but when it's my car out on fire out in the parking lot, an entire new level of feeling is going to be there. So you could also say that the self is arising not necessarily as the clinging starts, that it can actually be much earlier in the process. But what Bhikkhu Buddhadasa wants to point out is that if we can be mindful at the point of contact, so that we can begin to manage our feelings. Now, we have feelings that are normally, we like it. We have feelings we don't like it. And then we will have feelings that are neutral, in the sense that we don't know whether we like it or not. But this feeling is normally ignorant. But if we can bring it to the point of wisdom, then those neutral feelings are wise neutral feelings that don't give rise to the state of confusion or wanting something.
Right.
So if we like something, we merely like it. Like the girl is beautiful. Thank you very much. Goodbye. I don't have to let that feeling escalate into lust, because that's where my wisdom is there. Is my wisdom is watching my feelings at that point of contact. How do my feelings arise? This is the way of breaking the chain.
Okay.
This is the place that we want to look, is at the level of feelings, of how they arise and whether they can arise either ignorantly. And if you have a feeling that's arising ignorantly, but then you add wisdom to it, that's going to change the quality of that feeling very quickly. So again, it's the whole process of starting to watch. It's a watching process. But we can watch a little earlier. That in fact, the more we understand things, we can watch stuff right back to the salayatana, and if you're getting good at it, you can actually watch consciousness as it arises. In fact, this is really liberating, because most people think that consciousness is there to be applied,
Right.
rather than that it's not there and arises to be applied. There's a big difference like that. Okay, let me give you an example about fire. You know that fire, from the scientific viewpoint, it has to have a fuel, it has to have an oxidant, and it has to have a kindling temperature. Oxygen is normally given through the air, so you have a fuel, and you have the air, and you have a kindling temperature, and then you have the fire. Now, where does the fire go when either it loses its temperature, or it loses its fuel, or it loses its oxygen? For instance, if you see CO2 extinguishers, the CO2 extinguisher will rob the fire of its oxygen. If you break up a fire and take the sticks of the fire and move them apart, then you're robbing it of its fuel, and you're also robbing it of its kindling temperature. So when a fire goes out, where does it go?
It arises and passes away.
Well, You're supposed to say it goes out.
It goes out. Yeah.
Yeah, all right. And here's the reason why, is because out is a magical place, like a cave, where fire goes. And it rests there.
Right.
And it only re-arises when it has an opportunity, but normally fire is in a place called out. This is how people have the concept of consciousness. The reason I'm telling you this story is because we have this kind of consciousness idea that is always there, that I am the consciousness. Where in fact, no, consciousness is independently arising, and part of your job through wisdom is begin to see that happen. Begin to recognize what is consciousness, when consciousness is free from the quality that we're calling namarupa, or perception. So in fact, you can look at it like this. The most bare thing is consciousness. The next thing is perception. From perceptions, we have ideas. From ideas, we have beliefs. And from beliefs, we have belief systems.
Yeah.
So if we can pull that stuff apart, we can pull it apart back down at the level of the perception itself. Because the perception is what leads rise to the feeling.
The consciousness only arises when there's contact with an object, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
All right. Okay. Yeah, because some people believe that it's always there.
It's up to you to prove to yourself whether what I've just told you is correct or not. It's not a matter of belief, it's a matter of investigation.
Right.
And so this is what needs to be investigated. And you can also begin to investigate the sankhara in the sense of watching your newborn daughter. Watch how she starts to build her maps. Watch how she starts to learn language. Watch how she learns to walk. All of this is stuff that she's building up.
Yeah.
And if she's a happy baby, then she will build into her sankhara system a happiness. If she's an unhappy baby, then she will build that also into her map.
Right.
So that you can have, if you work hard at it, or maybe not even very hard, you can actually have a happy baby. But you can't guarantee that she's going to be happy all the time. No, when she's walking, she's going to fall down. She's going to fall down a lot.
Yeah.
Learning to walk is hard work. And we fall down a lot doing it, and we hurt a lot doing it. But when the baby learns to pick herself up, dust herself off, and start all over again, that's when she's making real progress. But if she lays on the floor and cries, then she's not making any progress. Rather, she's building bad maps instead, so that she's giving her a new way of remembering how to suffer, instead of a way of coming out of it so that she can be joyful.
Yeah.
So as we are investigating, we begin to also understand that we have old beliefs, we have old sankharas, we have old things. One example of that is that foreign language is very, very difficult for an adult to learn if they haven't had any. In other words, if they only learn one language as a child, then as an adult, all foreign languages will be difficult. But if you have a child who's raised in a home that has two different languages, like in our Thai and English, then that child will be able to pick up languages a little easier, a lot easier. But if a child has three languages when they're growing up, then they will be natural linguists, and they'll pick up 15, 20, 30 languages as they just naturally pick them up. And there are a few people who are like that. But you can't say, oh, I'm so jealous, look how smart they are. It's got nothing to do with smart. It's got everything to do with old maps that were created when they were children.
Yeah.
And so by the time we're 12, our maps are pretty well set, which means a 12-year-old will have a whole lot more trouble learning foreign language than a 6-year-old. For that reason, we're teaching our children foreign languages at the wrong time in school. We should introduce foreign languages in the first grade.
Okay.
Not in high school. By the time a kid's in high school, he doesn't have the mental wiring maps that he would still have available to him as a child. That we get those things kind of ossified. But that doesn't mean that they can't be undone. It's just a whole lot more difficult to do it. So if you can raise your baby, happy baby now, you'll give her a gift that she will never have to, for instance, go do Buddhist meditation. She won't have to. She won't need it. She will already have the goal because she's naturally happy. And children can be raised that way. An example of that would be the Dalai Lama. He was naturally happy. Why? Because he was. They did this procedure, in Tibet. They will have when a monk dies or something like that. Then all of the monks will get together and they'll go out and they'll find a kid that they really like. And when they find him, then they'll say, "Oh, Mom, we want to take this kid to the temple so that we can train him to be the next Dalai Lama." Mom's not going to give that kid away just because the monks want him. No, they have to convince that mom this kid is special, really super duper special. Oh, he was the last Mahakassapa or whatever in the last, and so they will give the kid a lot of tests to prove that he knows all of the stuff about which bells and which things to pick. That's all just a sham because the old monks, they'll give the guy 100% and it doesn't matter what he picks up. Why? Because they know that if they can take a young boy who's very smart and put him into the temple, they can raise him to be a Buddha much easier than if he arrives at the temple at the age of 20.
Yeah.
And this is just a matter of nature. But now that us old guys have to do it the hard way, we can still see that this is the procedure that we could have as children been different than we are now. So in a way, what I'm saying is that you've got to go back and be a child again, to go back to unhook, to unwire, to be free from the mental maps that are causing us the hindrances that we have in our present day.
Yeah. Okay, so will we finish up soon? Because I need to do something.
Okay. Well, sounds like a good time to finish up. All
right.
I hope that you can figure out a way of doing a little bit of editing. You might want to edit out this part too, and the girls and whatnot. But most of it should be salvageable to put on our YouTube site.
Yeah, I'll look into that. Thanks for your time.
Okay. We'll see you later.
Okay, see you next time. Good luck.